Good afternoon. Want to thank everybody for coming out this afternoon. We're here for the unveiling of the historic marker for Reverend Robert Graetz and his wife, Miss Jeannie Graetz. We'd like to remind you that one of the things we want to do this afternoon is to invoke the name of the first mass meeting of the Montgomery bus boycott at the Holt Street Baptist Church on December 5, 1955. At that historic meeting, once the program began, the first song that was performed that night was Onward Christian Soldiers. We're happy today to have with us two professors from our own Alabama State University to help us with the singing of Onward Christian Soldiers, Dr. Cordelia Anderson, soloist, accompanied by Dr. Christopher Sanchez.
Onward Christian soldier, marching us to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe, forward into battle, see his banners go. Onward Christian soldier, marching us to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. At the sign of triumph, Satan's host to flee. On then Christian soldiers, on to victory. Hell's foundations quiver at the shout of praise. Brothers, lift your voices, loud your anthem raise. Onward Christian soldier, marching us to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Like a mighty army moves the church of God. Brothers, we are treading where the saints have trod. We are not divided. Brothers, lift your voice, one in hope and doctrine, one in charity. Onward Christian soldier, marching us to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Onward then, ye people, join our happy throng, blend with us our voices in the triumph song. Glory, loud and honor unto Christ the King. This through countless ages, men and angels sing. Onward Christian soldiers, marching us to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before.
I have received the permission from Dr. Anderson to refer to her as the Marian Anderson of the 21st century. And of Dr. Sanchak, we are calling him today the Michelangelo of music. Mayor Stephen L. Reed will not be able to join us this afternoon, so he sent someone to speak in his place. And I want to tell you, he sent one of the most capable individuals in our city to speak for him on two terms. Number one, he's his father. And number two, if there's anyone who knows about the political history of Montgomery, it is Dr. Joe L. Reed. Dr. Reed.
It's a pleasure for me to be here. I have to do a lot of things now. I've gotten old. Like the old man said one time, I asked him, said, how you doing? He said, well, I'm doing pretty well. I can't see. I can't hear. I can't do nothing but drive. So I'm almost that way, but it's a pleasure for me to be here in Steve's place. It's an honor as well, a great honor. To have the mayor of the city of Montgomery who believes in the civil rights movement, whose roots are in the civil rights movement, and who love in the civil rights movement. There are so many of you here who identified and who carried the civil rights movement long before Steve came along. Attorney Fred Gray, he needs no introduction. He'll be talked to later on today, and was my good friend Julia Mike Phillips, who was one of the first whites when Steve ran for mayor to invite him to his house and held an election party for him. And I haven't forgotten that. Julian. And for us to be here today to celebrate this unveiling of this plaque is really rewarding and really makes me feel good. Why? Let's reflect back at the time when Reverend Graetz was identified with the civil rights movement.
Just a few minutes.
It was my voice is not as strong as that jet, so I'll just be quiet for a little bit. The thing that's so striking about it, it's easy today, and so it's not as hard, for people to identify, praise, talk about fairness, talk about justice, talk about equality, and talk about all the good things that we were striving for. But think about the days when Reverend Graetz, a white man, identified, worked with, and moved around with the civil rights movement. It was much tougher then. So he was a man of courage, a man of vision, a man who believed in the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. It was tough then, and he paid a price for it. He paid a price for our liberties. He paid a price for our rights. He paid a price for us to be here. And we all in Montgomery will forever owe him and his wife a debt of gratitude for the things he did. Here he was beating the drums for justice when my son, Stephen, was yet unborn. And now we come to celebrate this day in his behalf. And I want to commend all of you, for doing this at a time, and to the family, Reverend Graetz. I want to thank you too. Steve wished he could have been here, but he couldn't. And the thing about it, Steve told me yesterday that I was to be here today. But the thing about it, I had another commitment up in North, between here and Birmingham. So I'm going to have to leave. I'm not leaving because I want to leave. I'm leaving because I already made a commitment. And I hope you'll indulge that and forgive me for having to leave. But again, I want to thank all of you for inviting my son to first to be mayor, voting for him, and also to allow me to substitute for Stephen Lewis Reed, mayor of our city. Thank y'all very much.
Dr. Joel Reed, speaking on behalf of his son, our honored mayor of this city. Robert Graetz was escorted into the Holt Street Baptist Church that Monday night by Robert Dandridge Sr. And I can imagine, as I've said before, that Robert Graetz may very well have been the only white person in that audience that night. So we want to applaud him for having the audacity to come, and Robert Dandridge for having the willpower to escort Reverend Graetz into that church. That night, I think we can earnestly say, the main speaker was a young minister who had come to Montgomery as pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. He too could not come here today. So we ask his son, his namesake, if he would send us a letter that we would read here today on behalf of Martin Luther King Jr. Here then is that letter that is also included in your souvenir program. And I just want to add, as we proceed here today, that this souvenir program will be on the internet on the site of the Alabama Historical Association and later on the website of the Alabama Department of Archives and History for those who did not get a program today and for those who might want an additional copy of our program. Here is the letter. Dr. Richard Bailey, Sr. Although circumstances make it impossible for us to join you in person, on behalf of my wife and partner, Andrea Waters King, my daughter, Yolanda Renee King, and myself, I want to write to you to express our warmest greetings to everyone gathered for the unveiling of the historic marker honoring the Reverend Robert Graetz and his wife and partner, Jeannie Graetz. We hold Reverend and Mrs. Graetz in the highest esteem for their courage and selfless leadership in support of the Montgomery bus protest of 1955, 1956, and the continuing works of my parents, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. At a time when very few white citizens of Montgomery supported the historic bus boycott, the Graetz family chose instead to answer the call of history and uphold the highest values of their faith to take a valiant stand for racial equality and interracial brother and sisterhood. Reverend and Mrs. Graetz did not merely lend their respected names to this historic cause. Instead, they served it as active participants, despite threats and antagonism of many white citizens who did not share their deeply felt commitment to racial equality and human rights. Reverend Graetz served as secretary for the Montgomery Improvement Association, and the Graetz family suffered multiple bombings of their house, but never did they back away from their heartfelt commitment to racial justice and the Montgomery bus protests. Our family will forever remain grateful and deeply inspired by the courageous leadership of Reverend Robert and Jeannie Graetz during the Montgomery bus protests, just as my father and mother valued their friendship and support with the highest admiration. This historic marker honoring Reverend and Mrs. Graetz will provide a reminder to future generations of our brave white brothers and others in Montgomery, and their names will forever embolden among the pioneers of the beloved community of my father's greatest dream for our nation and the world. And as we go forward into the uncertain future, the names of Robert and Jeannie Graetz will stand as a testament of hope for greater interracial understanding, goodwill, and brotherhood and sisterhood. In solidarity, Martin Luther King III. Thank you so much, Marty King, for sending that letter to us. The pastor of that church on then Cleveland Avenue, as everybody in America knows, was Robert Graetz. And that's why we're here today. So speaking about the courage of the Graetz family is the current pastor of that church and Mobile, Alabama native, the Reverend LaVon Wiggins. Reverend Wiggins.
Good evening, everyone. You know, they say beware of giving a minister the microphone. I do want to say this about Reverend Graetz. This was an amazing man.
Yes.
In the position that he was, not any of us probably could have done what he did without the Spirit of God in them. And not just him, but his wife, too. It's hard being a pastor. It's not easy. And some of you probably think it's a glorious job, but it's not. It's really a 24/7 job. And you are what you call an under shepherd, because Jesus is the shepherd. But an under shepherd, responsibility is his flock. And when Reverend Graetz received his call to Montgomery, he did a lot of praying. He stepped into some fire. He saw the abuse that went on during that first 6 months, and all of a sudden, the Montgomery bus boycott. He stood the test. He walked through the fire. It's like King David, when he was a shepherd boy, he killed the lion and he killed the bear to protect his sheep. Well, Reverend Graetz stepped to the fire and he protected his congregation. If he hadn't, he would have been scorned, correct? But he stood the test of time. And what a woman. if every man had a woman like this, he could walk with his head held high. Because this woman was out of sight. So not only was it his ministry, but it was her ministry too. So you must give him credit. But first, give God the credit. Because without God, where would we be? Never forget, God is always on your side. And Reverend Graetz and Jeannie knew that. And before they accepted the move to help out with the march, they prayed several days. And they made the right decision. The Bible says that those who are in the Lord, their deeds will follow them after they're gone. Well, look, we're honoring Reverend Graetz and his wonderful wife. You must give them their due. And give their children that too, because they were in the house when the windows were closed and people called and said, open your windows so we can see what you're doing, because they wanted to kill them. This family went through some hard times, but God has brought them through. And God will bring you through if you talk to him. And remember, never forget the Lord. Amen? Amen? And reach in your pocket and give me one more amen. Amen. Thank you, brother.
Mobile native, Concordia College graduate of Fort Wayne, Indiana, Reverend Levon Wiggins. So happy to have you in the city of Montgomery. Stay here. Thank you. About 6 o'clock on the evening of December the 5th, Attorney Fred Gray walked into the Hope Street Baptist Church. And we are so honored and deeply proud to be able to say on May 16, 2021, that we still have that giant of a man with us today and tomorrow. Attorney Fred Gray.
Good afternoon. I want to first say thanks to Dr. Bailey for all you are doing for the preservation of history, particularly in the city of Montgomery, and particularly in the field of civil rights. I want to also thank all of those who are responsible for this historical marker being unveiled here today. I certainly want to extend my personal greetings to all the Graetz children, the grandchildren, and other family members and friends. It is an honor to be with you today at this unveiling ceremony for Bob and Jenny, as we familiar who knew them well refer to them. As permanent as this marker also is permanent and far-reaching is the work done by Bob and Jeannie and the good trouble they got into for the sake of equal justice. I was, in preparing to say a few words here today, wondering just when did Bob first meet me. And you know, I went to his book, The White Preacher. memoirs. And he tells in that book how he, somewhat like Dr. King, was at his first pastorate here, just as Dr. King was at his first at Dexter. But then when the notice got around that there was to be a protest, and when it was read at his church and he participated in it, he knew even before then that he was going to get out the next day and help it, and he did. And he says in his book that after he had taken some people where they were going that morning, he stopped by the trial of Mrs. King, of Mrs. Parks. He was able to get in because he was white. And there was space in the white section, but the colored section was all taken care of. And he saw a fellow named Fred Gray, and that was his introduction to me on December the 5th, 1955, and that friendship has increased. We got to be good friends. And when about 6 months later, on the 17th day of June, when I got married to Bernice, guess what? I invited Bob Graetz to be one of the ushers in the wedding. So we had an integrated affair with the bus boycott. That relationship has exists between me and that family from then until now. And I'm happy to say that I represent both of their estates, and thanks very much to their son and to those families. So then, the Graetz became involved in the movement. They were the one set of white people who just about everybody knew were involved in it. They suffered greatly. But let me hasten, because I know there are a lot of other people here to speak. I hasten to add that in those days, such a commitment by whites, and they called them outside liberals, and sometimes they call them outside agitators, was a potential death sentence, and several died. Yet the Graetz were not deterred, were not dissuaded from their calling. They never sought fanfare, only sought religious indignation for inequality and injustice, and the denial of constitutional rights, particularly to American citizens. And they offered their quiet, humble presence and participation to correct the wrongs and calm the storms of racial and social injustice. And they continued to do that until their death. From all of us who fought then and who are still fighting to help this nation become true to its creed, a debt of gratitude is owed to Bob and Jeannie Graetz for their work. No battle can be won without faithful and committed warriors, and they certainly were two of them. Thank you again, Dr. Bailey. Thank you, the Graetz family, for allowing me to share this occasion. Thanks also to the Graetz children for perpetuating the legacy of your parents, Bob and Jeannie Graetz. May the work your parents did, beginning here in Montgomery in 1955, continue through the work that you are doing by the perpetuation of the legacy through the Robert and Jeannie Graetz Foundation. Thank you very much. May God bless you, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, Attorney Fred D. Gray. born on Hercules Street, west side of town. If you will look in your souvenir program, you will notice that our next scheduled speaker is listed as Reverend E. Baxter Morris, esteemed pastor of the First Baptist Church, 347 North Ripley Street, Montgomery, since 1972. On May 2nd, 2021, Reverend E. Baxter Morris answered the final call and went on home to be with his Lord. As you see in your souvenir program, the decision was made to leave his name there as a way of showing the deepest admiration and respect for that giant of a man. I was honored to have had the opportunity yesterday to speak at his homegoing. That was an occasion I shall never forget nor minimize. And I want all of us here today, if you just take 10 seconds and bow in honor of Reverend E. Baxter Morris, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. One of the towering figures in Montgomery during the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, you name it, was a Pullman porter by the name of Edgar Daniel Nixon. Persons who knew him professionally called him E.D. Nixon, and persons who knew him up close called him Bruh Nick. We're going to ask Reverend Dr. Calvin McTeer to come and say a few words about the relationship between the Graetz and Bruh Nick.
Good evening. I bring you greetings from the Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, where Edgar D. Nixon was a member. And I also stand here as a recipient, as a benefactor of all of the civil rights efforts that had gone before me. To be honest, in December the 5th, 1955, Attorney Gray, I was about a month and a few days old. Well, let me say that. My twin and I were about a month and a few days old. But when I went to Bethel, I did some personal inquiry about Dr. Nixon, and I got some, matter of fact, I was doing some research just a few minutes ago talking to Pastor Charlie Davis, who's also a member of Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, and I guess that researcher in me just won't go away. And we asked about how did you know Dr. Nixon, and what kind of fellow he was, and all of this. And I have to say, and I'm thankful for the legacy that he left, and I'm also thankful for this relationship that he had with Reverend Graetz. And I'll just reiterate what has already been said. Do you realize, how can I say this, the courage, the audacity that he had to take the stand that he did when he did? But I want to say this, Dr. Bailey, is that the courage that he displayed, the courage that E.D. Nixon displayed, has to be displayed today in the midst of what we see going on in the contemporary setting. I was at church a few minutes ago, just visiting, and I told them, I think I'm going to do a sermon. And the name of the sermon is going to be, I did see a putty cat. I did see a putty cat. I watched January the 6th the same way you did. And I was flabbergasted. But yet, there are some living souls who will stand and get in front of a microphone and tell me that I didn't see what I thought I didn't see what I saw. And we have to be as bold as Robert Graetz, E.D. Nixon, Rosa Parks, to stand in the face and challenge the current that's now flowing against justice and equality, and tell them, just like Tweety Bird said, I thought I saw a putty cat, and come to the revelation and the realization that I did see a putty cat. We're thankful for the relationship between Graetz and Sister Jeannie. I had a chance to quiz, I'm Dr. Reverend Graetz, and I asked him about someone I had never met. Asked him about one of my predecessor, Reverend Hubbard, and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember him. He gave me some sentiments about Reverend Hubbard, and all of those who came together for this great collaborative effort that was the Civil Rights Movement." And again, I want to thank God for Reverend Robert, Jeannie, Graetz, and all of those who helped put me where I am. They didn't have, E.D. Nixon didn't have a degree, but he had the willpower, he had the knowledge, he had the audacity, the boldness, and the common sense that it took to help the Civil Rights Movement at the bus boycott. And I'm thankful that I've been placed in the shadow of these great predecessors, these great men and women who have gone on before you. And today, I thank again Dr. Richard Bailey. We thank you for this opportunity. May God bless and keep each of you.
Reverend Dr. Calvin McTeer, pastor of Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, 2106 Mill Street, heart of West Montgomery. Thank you so much. Dr. Farrell J. Duncan, is he here? He's not here? Okay. We have listed in the program that Dr. Janice Franklin will speak on Jeannie Graetz, but she instead will speak on Robert and Jeannie Graetz. So we're getting more than your price of admission. Dr. Franklin.
First, I'd like to acknowledge the Graetz family. Thank you so much for this invitation to participate today, and acknowledge all of the distinguished guests that are in the audience today. Yes, it's impossible for me to just talk about Mrs. Graetz because Reverend and Mrs. Graetz are one, and that's the way we view them in our center. On behalf of the National Center for the Study of Civil Rights and African American Culture at Alabama State University, I stand here with Dr. Dorothy Autry in celebration of this historic marker that honors the legacy of Reverend Robert and Jean Graetz, civil and human rights activists for social justice, authors, religious leaders, and forever members of our family at Alabama State University Civil Rights Center. Reverend Graetz and his devoted wife, Mrs. Jean Graetz, lived and loved as one. teaching us and others that the word race means respecting all cultures equally. Through their own example, Reverend and Mrs. Graetz lived their lives as people of faith, humanitarians, and in addition to these extraordinary attributes, they both are recognized as courageous civil rights champions who have sacrificed much for human rights and reconciliation. Their life and work demonstrated principles of brotherhood and the dream of a beloved community envisioned by Dr. Martin Luther King, their friend and confidant during the modern civil rights movement. We are indeed grateful to the Graetz for their decision to donate their papers to our archives. It was Reverend Graetz who said to me that he wanted their papers to be in the hands of the people from which this great history came at Alabama State University. Leaving their papers to us meant that they were leaving a legacy of love and scholarship to our community and to the world. It was one of the most gracious acts of kindness and compassion that we have experienced in meeting world-renowned people. Upon their return to Montgomery, Reverend and Mrs. Graetz became a part of our work at the National Center, ministering to visitors worldwide and often apologizing for the sufferings of the African American community, saying with conviction that it was our struggle as African Americans that taught others how to be Christians. From that moment forward, Reverend Graetz and Mrs. Graetz demonstrated their sincerity to all of us, becoming university ambassadors, consultants for the center, graciously lending their name to our symposium on civil and human rights, and acting as good Samaritans across the city. Through their own example of walking hand in hand across our campus, dressing alike, lovingly engaging our students, hosting us at this home, speaking to international groups, and just being our family. Reverend Graetz and Mrs. Graetz are honored and loved for their very lonely walk of courage and their very Christian stand for justice and nonviolent social change. At ASU's National Center, we will teach, love, and preserve the historic legacy of the Honorable Reverend Robert and Jeannie Graetz for future generations to come. This marker will be a symbol of their lives well lived for the cause of human rights and social justice. Thank you.
Dr. Bailey just asked me to speak of the relationship between Mrs. Rosa Parks and the Graetz. And some of these stories you may not have ever heard. But since Reverend and Mrs. Graetz worked with the National Center in so many programs where we taught the civil rights movement at our National Center and at ASU, and we've heard him talk about how he became acquainted with Mrs. Parks and their relationship. One story he told was that after Mrs. Parks was arrested, and he had heard about the arrest, he didn't know it was her, that he called her because she had been a friend. You know, she lived in the projects across from the church where they pastored, and she was the advisor to the NAACP Youth Council which met at the Graetz's, the church Reverend Graetz pastored. So that night when the arrest took place, he didn't know who was arrested, he said. But he called Mrs. Graetz, whom he already had known, just as I said, and asked her about it. And he said, I heard that somebody's been arrested, on a bus for not giving up their seat to a white man. And yes, she said, Reverend Graetz, that's true. I heard, yes, Reverend Graetz, that's true. I heard, yes, Reverend Graetz, that's true. Do you know who it was? And she said quietly, it was me, Reverend Graetz. So the Graetz regarded Mrs. Parks as a close ally and friend, and their relationship grew because they were neighbors. And so on this day, I know they're all in heaven, and I'm sure they're rejoicing of their relationship. But let's keep in mind that they were partners in this fight for justice and equality. Thank you very much.
Dr. Autry, longtime chair of the History Department, Political Science at Alabama State, really appreciate your talking about Rosa M. Parks. Jeannie Montgomery, Graetz, was also a member of One Montgomery, and Mr. John Broadway got the opportunity to know her quite well. And for that reason, we'd like for him to come up and say a few words about his dear friend, Jeannie Graetz, and if he wants to add something about Robert Graetz, we'd appreciate that also. And I see we got a husband and wife team, and that's the spirit, ladies and gentlemen.
Dr. Bailey and the family, the Graetz family, it's certainly a pleasure and a high honor to be here today, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity. I think the team thing that you mentioned is central in that Jeannie and Bob were totally together in a team, and it probably would not have worked as well as it did if they had not been so together. So I'd like Jeannie to give a word or two first.
About Jeannie. Jeannie and Robert Graetz worked together all their lives, all their adult lives, toward a very serious and important goal, racial justice and inclusion. Yet there was also a playful and romantic spirit between them, even in their later years. I loved the way Jeannie took pleasure in seeing that their outfits matched every Tuesday morning for one Montgomery meeting, and that Robert would kiss Jeannie on the cheek or the hand after the blessing and before they eat, no matter where they were. I also appreciated Jeannie's practical side, that when we asked how we could help after Robert was bedridden, she let us know exactly. "Come cut my yard," she said to John. and she'd ask us to come over and sit with Robert at a specific day and time so she could get out and get some fresh air and exercise. They kept their promises to each other no matter how much time had intervened. So Jeannie was able to complete her college degree at age 85, as Robert had promised when they got married. And seeing Jeannie bring Robert by city bus after he was in a wheelchair to an event that they both thought was important spoke volumes about their relationship. What a privilege to have had them as friends for so many years.
And just to add a further word about my perspective on Jeannie, when I think about Jeannie, the word persistence comes to mind. This was a person of endurance, a person who was a runner, a marathon runner, not a sprinter. When Jeannie could have been quiet, she consistently spoke out. Any injustice, wherever it was and whatever it was to be named, identified, no matter the awkwardness that resulted. When Jeannie could have avoided the special effort to get Robert out of the house, she made that special effort. When Jeannie could have felt sorry for herself, she continued to move forward. When Jeannie could have stood in the shadow of a great man, Jeannie instead walked that narrow path to be a full partner, yet not to shrink and put herself first. Many times she did stand alone, while at other times she remained a reliable aid to Robert and to others when needed. We are all better for these memories. Thank you.
Mr. and Mrs. John Broadway, members of One Montgomery, a biracial group here in the city, and we just want to let them know how much we appreciate their coming out. For those of you who might be a little thirsty, we do have some bottled water to my left and to your right. It's right over here. If you need some bottled water, we have plenty of it. We have some paper towels. If anyone needs some paper towels, we have plenty of paper towels. So don't hesitate to partake of the bottled water or the paper towels, whatever it is you need. Thank you so very much. Mr. Tim Lennox knew the Graetz in a very special way. For many of you, you've seen him on Channel 8 as an anchor for our news person, and your community this week on Sunday mornings, and before that you saw him on For the Record, Alabama Public Television. But let me tell you, if you're talking about a person who has a heart made of gold, who loves history and loves people, you can put at the top of that list Mr. Tim Lennox.
Can't shake hands anymore. We can't hug. That's passing. You know, my relationship with the Graetz family is kind of interesting. I'm going to explain it very briefly. And I'll be brief because people who are in broadcasting know you have a time for the script, and that's it. They pull the plug on you. I retired 2 years ago from broadcasting full-time. And somewhere early in those 50 years, I think probably up in Birmingham, where I was broadcasting before I moved to Montgomery in 98, that's when I first met the Graetz and did my first interview with them. And I was astounded. This was like civil rights royalty. It was a great interview, and I remember it to this day. I can't date it exactly. But after that, there were other interviews over the years. I moved to Montgomery, and then, of course, it was more likely that I'll be interviewing them, and I did. This, of course, over the years, I met the Graetz children, of course, and became friends with them. And really, I've almost become an adopted member of the Graetz family. If we did things like this, I'd have the, Tim Lennox / Graetz behind my name. When I retired in 2019, it was the same time that Dr. Graetz, Reverend Graetz, fell ill and was in the hospital and then was at home hospitalized, basically. And because that wasn't working, it was, in a sense, a blessing, because it gave me an opportunity to volunteer my time to help them and help the family out. And that made me even more, I think, a member of the family. It allowed Mrs. Graetz, Jeannie, to run errands when she had to go meet with some of the visitors to Montgomery to talk about the civil rights history that the city has. She and I would sit on that porch over there for hours talking about, you name it, news. There was a lot to talk about in the last couple of years. We did a lot of that. We talked about the family, and we talked about the history of civil rights in Montgomery and the history of the Graetz family in Montgomery. After Reverend Graetz passed and Mom fell ill, I had an opportunity to sit with her as well. Meta and David and the rest of the family are very gentle and nice in calling me one of their angels, saying that they were so thankful that I provided the help that I did. But the truth is, it was me. I was the one who really was blessed to be able to do that. I had retired, I had time in my hands, and I can't think of a single thing that I could have done with that time that would in any way have been better than spending it with your parents. Thank you for inviting me. Doctor, thank you as well.
Mr. Tim Lennox, New York native. He now calls Alabama home. We're so proud of him. Another person who knew the Graetz up close is a neighbor. And I don't think we could have found a better person to talk about the Graetz as neighbors than our good friend and yours, everybody's attorney, Attorney Julian McPhillips, Jr.
But you can see when I take my hat off, I'm no spring chicken. But I was born in 1946, which makes me really just a kid compared to my great hero over here, Fred Gray. But Bob Graetz, I have no greater hero. And in his honor and memory, I also want to say this: to God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be all honor, praise, and glory. Because he made it sure that everything he did was sort of in that theme and in that spirit. And so I'm humbled. I'm the son of a preacher man myself. And in fact, my own father was inspired greatly by by Dr. Robert Graetz. And in fact, he came to Montgomery in 1962, a later career for him. And his first church was at the Church of the Ascension, but he was also given the Church of the Good Shepherd, which, if some of you know about it, over on corner of Grove and Jackson, it was an all-black African-American church, and he was there for 2 years, and sometimes he was asked, "Oh, are you afraid?" This was between 62 and 64. Robert Graetz not only inspired my father to minister in an all-black church in 62 and 64, and in 1965 there were so many killings going on, black and white. If you're involved in civil rights, it was just a risk you assumed. In fact, Dad preached a sermon about thou shalt not murder that's framed in the Rosa Parks Museum on that subject. But anyway, we moved back to Montgomery. My family was here for only 2 years in the early 60s. I moved back in 1975, and because of connections with Virginia Durr and others, I was introduced to E.D. Nixon and Rosa Parks and others, and also was told so much about Robert Graetz that I could hardly wait to meet him, which we did, I guess, in the 90s or the 80s when they moved back, and soon became our neighbors. And anyway, and not only was he a neighbor, but he was a healing neighbor. 15 years ago, I had an illness myself that I did not think I was going to be able to shake, but he prayed. What? He prayed with me, and well, anyway, I want to say when Robert Graetz was in my house, I had a doctor in my house. Because he prayed for me, and I was able to break the spell of kind of an illness that hit me at that time, and I will always be grateful. But they were our neighbors. This was 15 years ago. I'm not sure when they moved into this house. It was maybe 20 years ago, and soon became fast neighbors. We did all kinds of things that were neighborly things to do. But I would like probably to defer to my sweet wife. It's getting to be quite the thing, couples, and they have inspired us as couples. Clifford and Virginia Durr have, and others have. So I'm going to defer to my far better looking wife to tell you about some of the neighborly things that we were able to do with the Graetzes. Okay?
One thing Jeannie kept telling me over and over again, and told me as recently as maybe a year and a half ago, she said, when are you going to put that gate in between our yard and your yard? Well, I never did, because there's probably a 2-foot step down, and I also have 2, and now I have 3 dogs, and they don't need to be dealing with Jeannie coming and going. And by the way, the dog that you heard barking, that was mine. And I went back and had a talk with him, and I used the magic word, hush. And he's been quiet since. But anyway, Jeannie, one thing I absolutely adored watching, and I had tried so many times to help, was Jeannie pushing that big, huge wheelchair down the street, down the sidewalk. And then she'd cross the street, she'd stop at the box here at the Fitzgerald Museum and look at all the books, and I think she put some books in there from time to time. But no matter how hard it was for her to push that, she was right there pushing, and with all her strength. And one day I saw her pushing up the hill on Felder, and I went and I helped push, because that would have been too much. But anyway, thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, just one last thing, Richard. Dr. Calvin McTeer had a note that we cannot let go, and that is the note that the work ain't over yet. The work is still very much in need, not only what you saw January the 6th as he saw, but there's a lot else going on. So I've been hugely inspired in my work, legally, theologically, and otherwise, by the Graetzes to keep on keeping on, and that I will. God bless you all. Yeah.
We're going to call on our good friend, Mr. Scotty E. Kirkland, and he's going to tell us why historical markers matter. And believe it or not, it's quite significant for me that he come at this time to tell us why historical markers matter. Scotty Kirkland, our friend.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bailey, and thanks to all of you for coming today. A couple of weeks ago, when we announced this marker dedication to the members of the Alabama Historical Association, I told them something very simple. I said, those of you who know Dr. Bailey know his heart, and you know that when I say that he has put his whole heart into this marker program, you'll know what that means. So before we go any further, we should recognize Dr. Bailey's contributions. I was just talking to our wonderful accompanist a few moments ago, and I was talking to them about that third stanza of Onward Christian Soldiers. It's always been my favorite. It has a verse that says, brothers, we are treading where the saints have trod. And I feel like that today. I feel like we are here with quite a few saints that live still, and here to honor 2 more very important ones as well. I serve as chair of the Historical Marker Committee for the Alabama Historical Association. It was founded in 1947. It's the oldest statewide historical society in Alabama. Its purpose is to foster meaningful engagement with the past through meetings, through scholarship, and through this marker program. And since the 1950s, the association has helped local people and their communities erect almost 1,000 historical markers. Before I go any further, I want to encourage you right now to think about the events and the people and the places in your own communities that you think should join that long list of markers throughout Alabama that will look like the one here. Every time you drive by one that has the Alabama state flag in the crest, I want you to think about one thing. What in my community deserves one of these markers? This is the type of program that we administer now. We administer a community-driven marker program, and I want you to know that I believe in that program. I believe it's the way that these things ought to work. Dr. Bailey's wearing a button. We did not plan this. He's wearing a button that says, Alabama history is my history. Alabama history is your history too, and we want to encourage you to think about the places in your community that should be recognized. Dr. Bailey deserves high praise for envisioning this day, but I can tell you that you can do the same thing. Do not let cost or details stop you. We can work together, and when we work together, there is much that we can do. So Dr. Bailey asked me today to speak briefly on the question of why historical markers matter. This marker that we unveil today matters for very simple reasons. It matters because Reverend Robert and Jean Graetz mattered. The work that they did together matters. The example that they set, the example for an engaged citizenry, for fellow believers working out their own compassion to the community, and for the advocates of equal rights of all people that they represent, that matters today. Perhaps it matters more today than it even did just a few years ago. I did not know the Reverend and Mrs. Graetz well, but I did have the occasion to spend a few quiet moments with them a few years before his illness at an event that Congressman John Lewis held here in Montgomery, and it was an honor. But recently, after we started working on this project together, I reread Reverend Graetz's book, A White Preacher's Message. If you read those words, I think you'll find that like any good sermon, it is as applicable to the situation today as it was when he wrote it, just as resonant, just as relevant in 2021 as it was in the 1950s, as it was when he penned his memoir. And I hope that years from now, someone walking along this street who doesn't know that story stops and reads this marker and commits in their own heart to the example that Reverend Robert and Jean Graetz showed in their own lives. Finally, this marker matters because of all of you, because of the men and women who donated to ensure that it was created, and of those of you who have gathered today to witness its dedication. I believe firmly that markers are a reflection not just of the people they honor, the places and events that they commemorate, but that they are a reflection of those who work to erect them. Let it be said of all of us that in the bright sunshine of this day, which was Reverend Graetz's birthday, that we pause to honor a great man and woman and put them in a place of honor both in our hearts and in the city they chose to call home and work so diligently to make better. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Scotty E. Kirkland of the Alabama Department of Archives and History, and I just want to say, when I leave this place, I'm headed to wherever Dr. McClung was taken to ensure that I lend him my moral support. At this point, we'd just like to recognize our special guest, and what I'll do, when I call your name, you just raise your hand. That'll be just fine. Chip Hill, Chief of Staff for the Mayor of Montgomery, wherever you are. Chip Hill. Jamala Filia, Special Assistant to the Mayor. Tanla Johns, Special Assistant to the Mayor. Philip Insler, Senior Policy Advisor to the Mayor. Cheyenne Webb Christberg, noted author, youth advisor, civil rights guru, and whatever else we want to give her. Where is she? She had to leave? Okay. All right. And Dr. Willie D. McClung, first mass meeting of the Montgomery bus boycott, as we've mentioned several times, was held at the Holt Street Baptist Church. Attorney and Mrs. Julia McPhillips. Nelson Malden, who gave Dr. King his first haircut when he came to Montgomery. He loves to talk about when Dr. King drove up in that blue Pontiac to the barbershop on Jackson Street. Sandra Nickel, Valerie Smetler, owner and operator, Tours of Montgomery. Cedric Bonner, longtime television talk show host. Randy Williams, publisher, New South Books, community advocate. Okay, he had to leave. And all of you are our special guests, and Dr. Dorothy Autry, former History Department chairman of the Alabama State University. At this point, we will unveil the marker, and here's what we will do. Attorney Fred Gray, I would like for you to join us for the unveiling of this historic marker, and I would like to ask Meta Graetz if she would say a few words, and David, if you want to, we're going to take 1 or 2 photographs after they unveil the historic marker to continue the program, and then when the program has ended, everyone who wants to take a photograph with the Graetz is free to come up and do that, but we don't want to stall the program by taking 1/2 hour of photographs. So we'll take 1 or 2 photographs after 1 or 2 of the Graetz children have spoken, and then we'll continue our program. So Attorney Fred Gray, if you would join us here, we'd appreciate it. And as they come, I just wanted to point out David Graetz in this group was born in Montgomery during the Montgomery bus boycott. So he is a special tie to Montgomery. Meta here was born in Los Angeles before her father and mother came to Montgomery. But David Graetz, I've already said to him, we should have an ordinance in the city of Montgomery saying that people who were born during the bus boycott can never leave Montgomery for any longer than 6 months at a time. And he reminded me that he's in the military, so I said that won't fly. Okay, so Meta, if you'll talk to the group, and then we will unveil the historic marker.
Since I'm a short person, I'm going to pull this down. Anyway, before we make our remarks, I would really like to, on behalf of our family, to express our condolences to the Reverend Baxter Morris's family and our appreciation because they extended their church for both mom and dad's services, and I know what they're going through, and we just want to extend our love and appreciation to him and his whole family. And in particular, we want to thank the estimable historian extraordinaire, Richard Bailey. I mean, I have never seen a person with so much enthusiasm and dedication for history as Richard. And it's very catching. He makes everybody around him exuberant about learning your history and the importance of it. And he's driven, and I love it. But more than anything, we just want to express our love and appreciation to our beloved community. And of all the places that our family lived over the years, and trust me, we were nomads. We went where Dad and Mom were called, and we went where we as family members were called through our lives. And so we have always considered Montgomery the place that was the home of our hearts. And we as children growing up here, we learned lessons here that we have applied to everything we do in our lives. And the friendships and family members that we have made here through the years, most of them, 65 and more years plus. We consider our aunties our cousins, our brothers and sisters, as all of you are, and we are so appreciative. Today would have been Dad's 93rd birthday, and last birthday, they put him out here in his wheelchair, and by then his Parkinson's and other things were making it hard for him to laugh and enjoy himself. But he was having a good time. You just couldn't quite tell by the expressions on his face because the Parkinson's had kind of taken over a little bit. So some of the pictures we have from his last birthday, he looks a little disgruntled. But trust me, he wasn't. He was having a blast. But anyway, that is the thing that we enjoy the most about our family and our mom and dad, and mom in particular. She loved people. She absolutely adored each one of you, and it made her life so rich with the connection she had with people, and she never stopped reaching out and wanting to know everybody and love them. She never met a stranger. Same with Dad. And our house was a revolving door. We met so many interesting people from all over the world, and our family reflects that, because I think one of the favorite things I always heard her talk about, and when she would be talking to a group from all over the world, she would always mention that her family reflected the people she saw in the audience. She said, we come from many continents, we have many sexualities, we have many religions and everything else. She said, we just are a blended family that embraces everyone. So that is the thing I appreciated the most about my folks. They walked their talk. They're still walking their talk. And we're here to rejoice with all of you. And we thank you so much for being part of our family. And can't say enough how much we love you.
As I mentioned to you earlier, you can download a copy of the souvenir program from the website of the Alabama Historical Association, and fairly soon you'll be able to download a copy from the website of the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been one historic day in the city of Montgomery, and we'd like to thank all of you for coming out, our program participants, our special guests, and the guests of our special guests. We just want to let people know, young and old, uneducated, educated, rich and poor, how much we appreciate the Graetz and what the people of Montgomery actually stand for. We stand for justice, we stand for equality, and we stand for love and brotherhood among all people. That's the city of Montgomery that I want to tell people where I was born and where I continue to live. A better place for everybody. I'd like to ask Mr. Steve Murray and Dr. Janice Franklin if you'll come back to the front right quickly. Dr. Franklin from Alabama State University and Mr. Steve Murray, Director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History, established February 1901. I hereby present to Dr. Franklin a copy of this souvenir program for her safekeeping at Alabama State University. And likewise, I present a copy to Steve Murray, who is not only the director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History, but I want you to know, in case you have not heard this, the Alabama Department of Archives and History is the nation's oldest such institution. The nation's oldest, the first one, if you will, right here in Alabama. Everybody else came after Alabama, and the National Archives in Washington, D.C. is modeled after the archives here in the great city of Montgomery. Dr. Murray. Thank you so very much. And now we will hear from the Marian Anderson of the 21st century and the Michelangelo of music, and the words to My Country, Tears of Thee are written in your souvenir program, and you'll also find the origin of that song as well as the origin of Onward Christian Soldiers. We want to give you as much history as we can. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out, and we'll take some more pictures here after we finish singing My Country, Tears of Thee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I am honored to sing this as Marian Anderson performed this piece on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to honor for her being able to have the freedom and just represent that we have this freedom that we have. So, My Country, 'Tis of Thee.
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountain side, let freedom ring. My native country, the land of the noble free, thy name I love. I love thy rocks and rills, thy woods and templed hills. My heart with rapture thrills like that above. Let music swell the breeze and ring from all the trees sweet freedom song. Let mortal tongues awake, let all that breath partake, let rocks their silence break, the sound prolong. Our fathers, God, to thee, author of liberty, to thee we see. Long may our main be bright with freedom's holy light. Protect us by thy might, great God, our King.
Just want to remind you as we leave, the first song we sang here today, Onward Christian Soldiers, was the first song sang at the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, and they concluded with My Country, Tears of Thee as the final song. So that's why we had those songs at the beginning and at the end of our program. Thank you very much for coming out, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you all.